Welcome to Tuesday Night Live, the show where we ask all the big questions but don't take ourselves too seriously. My name is Andrew Sennett. Let me introduce the bearded bohemian, my co-host and conversation partner, Ryan. Hey Ryan, how's it going?
Good, thanks. I feel like you couldn't choose a more opposite word than bohemian.
Bohemian? You're not a bohemian?
Yeah, no, I think I'm very, very straight and narrow.
It didn't work. Nerdy didn't work. Maybe I'll try and think of a nerdy alliteration next week.
Sure, that makes sense. I'll tell you what, Senna, how's the weather going at the moment?
It seems like an appropriate conversation at the moment, doesn't it? How's that weather? I've got to say, the last year and a half, like we're in a horrific drought. You know, we're on water restrictions. We had the worst fires we'd had in decades. Then straight into COVID, and a year and a bit of COVID. And then the worst floods that our state has seen for decades, like 60, 70, 80 years, maybe even 100 years.
Yeah, we've been going from being burnt to infected to drowning pretty much.
Just unbelievable. It's not been so bad out where we are, though, is it? Like, I know that the low-level bridge in our town is flooded, but it's pretty okay out here. And it feels bad, doesn't it, that for us to get some nice rain, we have to drown the entire east coast of Australia.
Yeah, that seems to be the way, I think.
Yeah. It's like that poem. Did you learn that poem at school? I Love a Sunburnt Country?
It didn't come up at school, but like I know it.
Yeah, the droughts and flooding rains. It feels like we go from one extreme to the other, and that's what it means to be in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a wonderful poem, though.
I guess we learned a song to it, which I'm not going to sing to you now.
Yeah, please do not do that.
Don't inflict that.
I'll distract you. What does your shirt say? So what's going on there?
My shirt says, "Don't call me Shirley."
Oh, surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. Yes, it's. Thanks for the setup.
Yeah, I set you up there, didn't I?
Yeah, thank you for the setup. It's a pop culture reference from, I think the movie came out in 1977, if I'm not mistaken, but it's either late 70s, early 80s. In America, it was called Airplane, and when I watched it as a kid, it was called Flying High.
Yeah. Ben wonders which plague is next. He reckons his money's on frogs.
Frogs, yes. Well, it would fit. It would fit the mood we're in, wouldn't it? Okay, well, welcome to the show, everyone. If you're watching on YouTube, please do all the normal things that you do, liking, subscribing, notifications, sharing, comments, all that sort of stuff. Helps with the YouTube algorithm. And if you're tuning in through the Facebook community, welcome back. This show is, as we say every week, all about a conversation, because that's what it is. We are going to share real-life encounters with Jesus, and we're going to ask big questions about life, God, the universe, and everything. But the way we make this work is to talk about it together. And get you involved. So please add a comment, ask a question, and if you add the word mailbag somewhere in your comment, we'll take notice and include it in our conversation. But enough of that, let's get into the show. Okay, I want to kick us off tonight with a bit of a conversation about revenge TV. I find that our TV and movies are just saturated with revenge, the revenge motif over the past decade or two. I wonder what your favourite revenge TV show or movie is. Ryan, what's yours?
Oh man, I love John Wick. It's pretty violent and pretty intense, but it's just, it's mindless fun.
Yep, they shot my dog.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that one, or I love The Mentalist.
It's the whole
series,
7 series about
finding
revenge.
John. Yeah.
Did he eventually got revenge, didn't he, in the show?
Can I spoil it? It's an old enough one.
Yeah.
But yes, I wasn't very satisfied with the ending.
Right.
It was a bit, I don't know, just didn't quite hit the mark. But that's okay.
Yeah, it jumped the shark, I feel like, before it got to the revenge bit. Yeah. It went a bit too far. But
we've got Harry Potter as well, someone said in the comments.
I guess, the whole theory, isn't it, that he wants revenge on Voldemort? Yep. There was a great movie called Payback, starring Mel Gibson, that I really enjoyed. Quite violent, and he doesn't really play a nice person, but he's definitely out for revenge. It's a bit like John Wick, but a few years earlier. I love that comment. If you ever read the Jack Reacher books by Lee Child, his comment is, "Get your retaliation in first."
Yeah. There's also The Princess Bride. You kill my father. Princess Bride.
Yes.
Got to get that in somewhere.
Yeah. Kill Bill.
Kill Bill. Yes. Yeah, that's the whole.
Yep.
The whole premise. Gladiator.
Yeah. I am a. What is it? I'm a something. What's he? Father to a murdered wife. Husband to a murdered wife.
Husband to a murdered wife. Yeah. Father to a murdered son.
Murdered son, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
That's right.
It's a great line.
We've got in the comments. We've got Lion King and I don't.
The Land Before Time. I'm not sure.
The Land Before Time was.
I can't say I paid much attention to it, but yes, Lion King's got a bit of a revenge theme. Yep.
Thomas and Friends. I don't know. I don't know that one.
Dirty Work.
The Fugitive. Yep. That's.
Yep.
I didn't kill my wife.
I don't care. Yeah.
Yep.
Hamlet.
Yeah. All the Oceans movies. 11,
yeah.
12,
Yep. 11, 12, 13. Mad Max. That was a great one for when I was a kid.
Yeah. There's just something about seeing someone get their comeuppance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, as we talked about this week in my Facebook feed, I got a post coming through the 25 greatest revenge films. And so, yeah, but I think you're right. We do love seeing it, don't we? We love seeing someone really get what they deserve. And it makes, I think, what Jesus says, the Christian faith, a bit alien for us because it's so completely different. And that's what we're going to get into tonight, what Jesus says about revenge. It's time for story time with Amelia. Take it away, Amelia.
Hey, I'm Amelia, and I'm going to read Luke's record of one of Jesus' most famous teachings. Jesus said this, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful."
Thanks, Amelia, you absolute legend.
We've got a couple more suggestions. Some I get,
Yep.
some I don't. So maybe you can help me out. So Revenge of the Sith is another one. It's got
Yep.
in the title, but Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, I'm not sure about. I feel like people are now posting their favourite films.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, well, I guess there were revengey bits there, and he did get revenge, didn't he, on the guy, the boss of the prison.
Oh yeah, like the warden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we can move on to the main discussion, I think.
We can. I think the thing that really strikes me every time I see those words, or read those words, or hear those words of Jesus is, yeah, nah. The classic Australian expression, yeah, nah. It just feels like a completely impossible ethic, doesn't it? It's easy to love your family and your friends, but how do you love the people who hate you? How do you love the people who are your enemies? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know, because that's the thing about anger, right? It's easy to not be angry or to understand someone that you care about.
Yeah.
But when you don't know them, or when you, when you know something that you particularly don't like, I feel like it's so much easier, and you don't have to worry about it because you don't care about them.
Yeah.
But I don't know, because I feel like personally, like I'm a pretty passive guy.
Yep.
Right, and so I feel like sometimes I think I fall into the trap of feeling that this isn't that impossible, because I don't, when someone hurts me in whatever way, I don't retaliate, right? But
yep.
I feel like that's not what Jesus is actually saying here. He's not saying when someone hits you, don't just meekly walk away.
No.
Or don't try and, hide.
Yeah, he's saying something much worse.
Something even harder. Yeah, he's saying, like, care about that person.
Do good to people who are doing bad to you.
And when I rephrase it like that, when I reimagine that it's not just about retaliation or about revenge, it reminds me of just how impossible this feels.
Oh, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's not just that you don't necessarily get back good. There's no reciprocation. It's that it's quite possible you'll get back bad for the good that you do. When you do evil, do good to your enemies. I mean, how do you overcome anger, hatred, years of spite with people? You know, this history of bad blood. You know, what do you do with all that? Not walking away or ignoring what they've done, but loving them, acting for the good of them. Yeah, it's just, I don't...
So I feel like if Jesus says love your enemies, I feel like I need to, and I know it's not about being passive and it's definitely not about being aggressive. Do you have a... or like, what's your go-to definition of helping me understand what it means to love someone?
Yeah, good point, isn't it? Because I don't think Jesus is saying feel good feels for people that you don't like.
Don't give them a little love heart.
No, I think the word love here has a more, I guess, active kind of meaning than how you feel about someone. My shorthand definition for the word that's being used here is a self-sacrificial commitment to the good of the other. And so love means a commitment to the good of the other that's self-sacrificial, that you're willing to give up things of your own for to do good for them.
Right. So love is about not just feeling something, or it's not about feeling a specific way about someone. You can still feel hurt by them. You can still even be angered by them.
You may feel bad feels, but do good. You do good to them.
Right, and can part of that sacrifice being getting over those feelings, or is it bigger than that?
Well, I think that's a separate issue. I think we could come back and talk about that we'll probably spend a future episode talking about that somewhere. But I think what you're talking about there is forgiveness, and I think forgiveness is a slightly different thing. This is that, and that may be something we need to deal with along the way. But this is actually not so much forgiveness as love. This is actually doing good to your enemy when they're your enemy. And so this may not have anything to do with whether you forgive them or not. That's where that kind of state of the relationship's up to.
Monia's got a good question in the comments. She asked, can you love but not necessarily like? What would you say to that?
Yes, I agree. I think that's actually a really perceptive question. Because I think what Jesus is talking about here is exactly that, loving people that you don't necessarily like.
Well, they're your enemies, right?
Well, that's exactly right. You're not loving them when they become your friends. You're not saying, make your enemies your friends and then love them because they're your friends. I think that's the way we tend to think about it. Make your enemies your friends. But this is actually saying, love your enemies. Love those who hate you. Do good to those who hurt you.
Which... Again, when you phrase it like that, just feels even more impossible.
Oh, yeah, it's just, I think genuine altruism like this, right? I think we like the idea of being altruistic, of doing good in a disinterested way for other people. But I think genuine altruism is pretty much impossible for us because we just have a vested interest. And so we find this, when we understand what Jesus is really saying, I think most of us say this ethic is not just impossible, it's wrong.
Yeah, I think I could definitely understand that people would say that, like, to do this or to be this kind of way is particularly. I feel like I'd use the word weak.
Yep.
It'll just make you a weak person because people will just trot all over you. Like if you're, what is it? He says, if someone's taking your cloak away, like, don't withhold your tunic either, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're just giving stuff away in terms of the imagery that he's going for.
And we treat that as that kind of passive idea that you were talking about. But I think this is actually more than that. This is saying, you allow them to do that, and you do good for them anyway. You go beyond. If they're seeking your tunic, give them your cloak. I don't think this is about being passive and being walked all over. This is actually about actively doing it. This is not saying if he takes your tunic, allow him to take your cloak as well. This is actually being much more active. It's saying give him.
Yeah.
Do the thing. And this is why I think we think it's not just impossible but wrong. It's wrong and impossible and bad.
You should treat your friends and enemies, your friends and family like this, not your enemies.
Yeah. So how can you treat enemies the same as friends, the same as family?
Yeah.
How can you extend to them the same consideration and the same self-sacrifice?
Is that because you're putting them on the same level? in terms of the love.
Well, it seems like that, doesn't it? It seems to be what he's saying. He's saying treat them like family. Treat them like you would your own children. Do good to them. Yeah. How do you embrace a snake? We're not Hagrid. We're from the Harry Potter books.
Spider. Yeah.
We don't embrace monsters.
No.
We
If
don't do that.
If you think of someone that genuinely goes out of their way to help the worst of the worst in our society, we would say you're wasting your time, or you say that you're actually doing the wrong thing.
You're doing the wrong thing. You're nuts. You're crazy. You
should let them get their comeuppance.
Don't affirm them. Yeah, we would see it as, if you do good to someone who's evil, we would see that as affirming them in some way.
Yeah. And when you think of it like that, you would say it's wrong.
Well, I think so, yeah. I think that...
Generally speaking.
And so it's one of those funny things. People often look at Jesus and go, Jesus is a nice teacher. Jesus teaches us to be good, that sort of thing. But Jesus says things that we just think are crazy, that we would never do. And I think this is one of them. This is in some ways, one of the worst. The question is why? Why does he say that?
So what makes him even be able to say something like this? Like he ends it in verse 36 saying, "Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful."
Yeah.
So is that his reason? Is that why he's telling us to do this?
Yeah, well, that's the clear connection, isn't it? He's saying, when you do this, if you apply this ethic, if you live this ethic out in the world, this ethic of loving your enemies, you will be like God.
Yeah, because I think at times we can forget that God actually has an ethic.
Yeah.
That he doesn't that God actually, doesn't approve or can even hate the way that we live sometimes.
Yeah.
And particularly the way that we treat each other.
Yep.
Love, would you say that love isn't even easy for God sometimes? Or do you think it is an easy thing for him to do? I
think that's probably true if we consider how God might think of us. So this is the thing, we tend to think God's in some ways fairly neutral. He just affirms whatever we think. But the reality, I think, is that God doesn't affirm everything that we do. He doesn't appreciate the way we treat his world. He doesn't appreciate the way we always treat one another. He's not happy with that. And when he says be like God, he's saying that God is somebody who actually considers us in some ways to be his enemies, to be against him. It's a difficult relationship. And so in this sense, love isn't easy for God just because he's God. Love's hard for God because we make it hard because of what we're like. The way we treat each other, the way we treat this world. And so we tend to think, oh no, God's just this benign kind of figure up in the sky, that that just does whatever we want. But he's not like that. He actually has an ethic. A fairly strong one, and we break that ethic. We don't live according to it, and so
it's interesting that you go to the idea, and I think you're right, that how we are, the way we act, and the fact that God has an ethic can make us enemies with God.
Yeah.
And yet God loves us anyway, or as Jesus says, He's merciful anyway.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you can see that in the sense of, if we treat others harshly and that wrongs them and wrongs God, like the fact that he doesn't just smite us instantaneously, is at least some sense of mercy upon us, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what you look at what drives the revenge films, and the reason we like revenge films so much is because we want to see people get what they deserve, and I think that's when we're wronged, we want to see justice done. We want to see it done quickly. We don't want to delay it, and we want to see it fully done. But God doesn't do that with us. We diss God, we dismiss him, we turn away from him, we treat the world badly, we treat one another badly. And God doesn't take that out on us. He doesn't treat us the way I think he thinks we deserve. He actually allows us to live, and not only does he allow us to live, he gives us life and breath and everything else. He gives us families and communities. He gives us food to eat, and jobs to do. He gives us life. Yeah.
Yeah, and which is I find it pretty incredible, just generally speaking.
Yeah.
But there is another way in which he's merciful, or he loves us, right? Because he goes beyond just letting us live.
Yeah.
right? He actually goes out of his way to love us.
Yeah, I think that's right. He actually does for us. He does things for us that we can't do ourselves. And this is what the story of Jesus is all about. Christians believe that Jesus is not just some dude walking around Palestine 2,000 years ago, but Jesus is God walking the earth. He's actually God taking on our humanity. And so not only does God not squish us flat, he actually takes our life on and lives it alongside of us. He suffers with us and he suffers for us. And so he's not just some symbolic good teacher. He's God who's come to love us by, in the end, dying for us. And this is the Christian ethic lived out. This is why he says, be like God, because that's who he is. He's God showing us what this means. He's God loving his enemies. And so the very people he comes to are the people who crucify him. And so he stands in front of us and he says, be like me. That's what it means. That's what it's all about.
Which, again, just adds, at least for me, just adds to the impossibility.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like that makes it any easier, does it?
No, when you look at what Jesus does,
Yeah.
and we talk about it being the standard of love, that he would do that for us, and again, while still being his enemy.
Yeah.
What does that look like for us?
Well, I think this is the thing. It's not easy. It still is an impossible ethic. But I think we've actually watched this happen at different points in history. We've certainly seen Christians live this out in history. So in the first couple of centuries, AD, the church is small and it's being basically persecuted. Christians are being killed by their own government. They're dying because they follow Jesus, because they refuse to stop following Jesus. And twice in 2 centuries, in the 100s and the 200s, a major plague goes through the Roman Empire. And it's drastic. If you think COVID was bad, this was way worse. People were dropping like flies. And what happened? What happened to people then when a plague hit town? Anyone who had money packed up and left. They left behind the sick and they ran away to their country homes, and they left the poor and the weak and the sick, and they got away. But Christians did the opposite. Christians put this ethic of love, and they turned to these people who betrayed them, who turned against them, who'd killed them, and they loved them. They cared for them. And so they not only cared for their own sick, but they stayed and cared for their neighbours and their friends, these people who betrayed them and who hated them. They cared for them. They loved them. And that's what marked Christianity out as different. And certainly historians who look at that period say one of the reasons that Christianity grew so drastically in those first few centuries is because Christians looked different. There's a famous quote of the Emperor Justinian in the late 200s, who's a pagan and who hates the Christians and who wants to kind of see them kind of beaten out. And he says, why can't we love people the way they do? We can't seem to do it. They don't live the same ethic in the pagan empire. We're kind of used to this being an ethic, but it wasn't. And then Christians live that way. Yeah.
So, you give us examples like that, and you talk about, how Christianity, in a couple of instances throughout history, has pretty much abolished slavery.
Yes. Yeah. But it wasn't just once either. We think of Wilberforce in the 1800s, but it actually happened in the 6th century when Christianity kind of emerged into the Roman Empire. That empire lived completely on slavery. Slavery was just integral to life in the pagan world. But within 3 centuries, slavery was gone, and it was gone because of Christians.
So,
yeah.
But my question is, what makes someone actually do that? What is it? What is the actual? We've kind of talked about it a little bit, but what is for those people who have done this and made those sacrifices? What do you think has been the driving motivation behind all that they do? Yeah,
and I think it's this: be merciful as God is merciful. And so the people who put this ethic into practice are people who actually get God's mercy. They appreciate God's mercy. They understand God's mercy, and they want to be like that. They want to be like God.
So, that's really interesting. So it feels like verse 36 is Jesus is saying it. He's saying it as tell them this is how you should live.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like there's a sense in which we just reflect on that. Think about what God's done for you, and think about how that could change your life.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, which is an interesting, different way to look at it. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
So as in like you the reason, so the motivation behind it is
Yep.
not simply because Jesus told them to. While maybe for some that may be true.
Yep.
There's an underlying idea that they do these things. They're able to sacrifice these things because they've seen what God has sacrificed for them.
Yeah, I think those
And
things are tied up.
That drives them towards
Yeah.
doing that.
There's a reason for the command, and in a sense, the command contains the motivation and the reasoning for it. It would be impossible to live this ethic, I think, just off its own bat. And I think this is the problem a lot of people have. They think we can be good enough for God on our own, or we can somehow make it on our own. And Jesus says, well, yeah, no, you can't. Because I think this ethic is one of those things that's impossible to live. It's funny, in the 1990s in South Africa, there was a lot of trouble. You know, they were coming out of apartheid, and there was a moment where in a church, multicultural church actually in Cape Town, quite a large church, these gunmen broke into the church during the church service when there's thousands of people in the building. They walked in the front of church, they threw grenades down the aisles and sprayed the congregation with machine gun fire. They killed I think dozens of people. And they were arrested, and the families of those who were killed went on national TV that night and in their tears said they forgave the gunmen. And people were outraged. People were absolutely outraged that they could do that they could express that forgiveness for those people who'd actually hatefully killed their family members. But that's the difference, I think, experiencing God's mercy has and makes. I think, by the way, this from the other side, this is the reason today people feel totally comfortable ridiculing the Christian faith and mocking Christians and poking back at Christians, because they know that Christians are not going to take revenge on them. Christians are not going to treat them that way, and they know if they do that to other religions, they will cop it back. There will be vengeance. Christians are famous for not acting this way, and it's funny. People will still mock the Christian faith, and yet, well, they won't mock some other faiths. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a strange and kind of a poignant point.
Yeah.
But something that we didn't talk about, that I think you mentioned it before, about thinking how we think as people. But it always strikes me when Jesus talks about, like, if you love those who love you, like, how are you different to anyone else? Like, everyone does that. Well done.
Every mother instinctively loves her own children and parents, and that's the way we tend to act, and we tend to also. We do good to those who do good to us. And so that's how communities tend to work. You know, our communities work on, you know, if I lend you money, you pay it back with a bit of interest and everyone's happy. You know, we keep our contracts. We reciprocate. Of course, yeah. But doing good to people who you're not going to get anything back from, who may resent you, that's very different. But that's what's called the golden rule. Do to others as you'd have them do unto you. Not necessarily as they do unto you.
Yeah,
and that's a rule that's changed the Western world.
If you don't have an understanding, or if you don't have this command of what God's done for you, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to go out of your way to give up something for no gain or benefit.
Yeah. So the modern healthcare system that we take for granted, you know, this nationalised healthcare system we have in Australia, emerged out of Christians who cared for the sick, who ran, you know, leper colonies and cared for people who were seriously ill and cared for the sick during plagues, and began hospitals. Most of the hospitals began as Christian enterprises, and they were done to serve people, not because we could or should get anything back, but because we wanted to love people. Same for schools. The modern school system, we take for granted this idea that everybody deserves an education. Well, that wasn't always true. And schools, the modern schooling system began as things like Sunday schools. I'm not just talking about the big universities that were kind of church-run private enterprises, but schooling for the poor was actually started out of churches, and they ran Sunday schools for children who were caught up and trapped in the Industrial Revolution, who were working in factories, and they wanted to give them education and lift them up out of their poverty. It was churches that did that. And you can repeat that in so many different places. and in so many different ways, that how this idea, the golden rule, has changed our world, our culture, and given us so many of the things we take for granted as goods in our society. They have Christian roots.
Okay, so we've seen this golden rule play out, through history. But what would it look like for you and me now? Is it like we've asked it, we've talked about it? Is it possible? Is it possible as individuals to live out this ethic?
Is it possible to be an impossible person? I think it's an incredible challenge, and I don't know. I don't know, how do you live that ethic? Is it even possible? And I think the answer is yes. But to do that, to live this ethic out, you actually need to embrace the impossible God. I don't think the impetus for this, living this way, comes from inside of us, because we will want something back. We want just to love those who love us. To live this ethic, you need to embrace the God of the impossible, the God who loved his enemies. So I don't think it comes from inside of us. I don't think we can find it somewhere deep inside in our feelings. I think this is something that comes from outside of us that we need to find. And to find it, we need to find, I think, the God who embraces it and embodies it. So I think that's the only way to an ethic like that.
Right, thanks, Seno. I can see that we've got lots and lots of really good questions, so I want to make sure we have enough time for that. So we're going to stop there. We're going to move into our toilet break now, so we have a bit of a break before the mailbag happens. And today, what we've got, this is made by Seno himself. He's brought in the band The Doors. He's going to show us now. So let's play that if we're ready to go. All right, welcome back. Okay, we're into mailbag now, so let's get our first question up if we're ready to go. First one's from Laura. This one's directed straight to you, Seno. Why don't you use the handles of your mug?
Because that's how I roll. I'm gangster. I go against the status quo, and I don't live according to the rules.
But someone took the time to make that the handle there, and you're just intentionally ignoring that.
Yep. I thumb my nose.
It's just who you are. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll get into some more questions now. The first one's from Monia. So it's a little bit off topic. She says, "But can you forgive someone and still never want to speak to them again?"
Really good question. My simple answer would be, absolutely you can. There's a difference there, isn't there, between your action in forgiving someone and your feeling about them. And I think this is hard. This is difficult. I think what we want to aim for, and forgiveness once again, I think we're going to come around to this topic again, but I'm happy to have a kick at these questions now. I think with forgiveness, what we want to aim for something, don't we? We want to aim for restitution of relationship. We want to aim for relationship and reconciliation. But that doesn't always work out, and it's not always easy because of some of the issues that go alongside of it. And so I think you can definitely feel that way. I wonder if the question is what we ought to be aiming for and heading towards. And if we see with God, what God does is He gives everything. Jesus comes and dies for us and offers us forgiveness. But people not everyone accepts that. Not everyone in the world's a Christian. I don't know if you noticed that. But yet God is offering that forgiveness to everyone. And so I think there's the thing. So we can, I think, we can forgive someone in our own self, in our own heart. We can offer that forgiveness to people. But there are two things there, aren't there? One is, do they actually accept the forgiveness? Do they see their need for it? And then the other one is, what happens then to the relationship going forward? And so I certainly think that we can be forgiving and yet struggle with the person still. Absolutely. But I think what we would want to hope for and aim for over time is to see those feelings, hopefully, if possible, dealt with.
So a question that Jennifer's asked about that a little bit is, do you think maybe we need to just define exactly what forgiving is?
Yeah. Well, I think it's...
Do you think it's something to do with... So she asked, does forgive equal forget? Do you forget what they've done?
I think that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping for a fully restored relationship. What you're hoping for is that you're forgiving someone who wants forgiveness and who's seeking it, who's actually said sorry. And you would be hoping for a restored relationship. But not all of those things always happen. And I think as well, because we're human and we're not God, it's difficult for us to set things aside. I think the thing that God offers people is complete forgiveness, that He forgets, that He sets it aside. He doesn't even remember what we, in that sense, He's actually set aside what we've done and completely forgiven us.
Can you do it? Can you forgive someone if they're not sorry? There's a question from Ellie.
Yeah. Sorry, this is piling up, these questions.
Yeah, there's lots of them. Really
the answer is, Ellie, yes. You can forgive someone if they're not sorry, but obviously you won't have the full outcome of forgiveness in terms of restored relationship. So let me tell you a story rather than just answering questions in theory. My mum died a few years ago, and as part of that process for several years, I'd taken care of her. I'd cared for her finances and her well-being and dealt with the nursing home and all those sorts of things and the doctors and that sort of stuff. And over the last year of her life, my older brother got hold of her key card and he stole over half of her money while she was lying and dying in a bed in a nursing home. And I had to deal with all of that as I'm dealing with her terminal diagnosis and seeing the doctors and organising her funeral and trying to sort all those things out with her at the same time as I'm having to deal with the fact that my brother, my family, had done that despicable thing. And that was incredibly difficult. Now, I haven't seen my brother since then. He just took off. He's gone. That issue's not dealt with. He hasn't sought forgiveness. He hasn't returned the money. It's gone. Forgiveness for me meant letting that go and letting him go. Now I can do that without getting anything in return. And matter of fact, there's actually there are lots of goods in that. My ability to let him go, it leaves things it leaves things between him and God. I can do that because I know God will hold him accountable. I don't need to. And also, I know that he's done more damage to himself than I could ever do. What vengeance could I do to him? Could I have with him that would be worse than the damage he's done to his own soul by this despicable action? And the answer is none. He's done the worst thing to himself by taking that money. And that will make its way out in his life. So I think, I don't know if that really helps, but for me, forgiveness was letting that go not holding that against him. That means I don't hold some bitter seed in my life. I'm not filled with anger all the time when I think of him. And so it's actually, I think the irony is for a lot of this, it's actually good for me to not exact vengeance and to not seek vengeance. It's actually good for me to forgive. And I think as well that actually says there's something bigger in their life than me.
I think that was really helpful. Thank you, Senator. I think
Yep.
we've got a couple more questions, or time for a couple more questions.
Sure.
And I think we can come back to the topic of forgiveness a little bit later, but I think there are a couple of other themes. So the next question is from Monique. So how should we fit justice into this principle of love?
Yeah.
Should cries for justice go unanswered in this world? Should we have no consequences until Jesus is returned?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and it's a really hard one to answer, Monique. It's a good question. Because I think in this world, people do cry out for justice, and there is so much injustice. And so there's a part of us that wants to see justice done, but we know that we will never see justice done perfectly. And so what do we do? What balance do we hold there? Can you be forgiving and hold to justice at the same time? And I think in many ways you can. Because I think... well, think of it this way. Think about that church and the guys who rolled the grenades in the church and shot those people. Those families can forgive those people who did that. They can forgive them fully, which is a profound act of love that I find incomprehensible. But those men will still face the consequences of their actions. And so as family, they can forgive those men and yet still know that they need to face the consequences of their actions in court and according to the law. They can still be held accountable. And so there is, I think, in that sense, a balance between our willingness to forgive people, but also the pursuit of justice in this world. I think quite often sometimes I think issues of justice are crystal clear, and we can see them clearly, and we can actually do something about them. And in those cases, I think we should. So often, though, I think we don't actually see justice clearly, and we seek to lash out at people and take actions, but we don't see everything. We don't know everything.
I particularly like Romans 12, verse 19,
Yep.
when he reminds us that to never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it's written that vengeance is mine.
Yeah.
God speaking, that is.
Having said that, I think there are issues of justice that are worthwhile pursuing, and are
But I think
right to pursue.
if justice doesn't happen here, it's worth knowing that God does.
Yeah. And I think the only caution I'd make on all that is we've got to be very careful in our pursuit of justice, because we become self-righteous. We think that we have all the answers, and quite often the people who cry out most loudly for justice in this life are the people who perpetrate the biggest injustices in the world. And you only have to go back in history to see that. And I don't want to really invoke some of the worst people in history, but some of the worst regimes and people in history cry out for justice as they're doing despicable things in the world. And so you've just got to be, I think, a bit careful with how vigorous and loudly you cry for justice, because you might become a person who perpetrates the worst of injustices if you do that.
Okay, we'll move on to our next question from Kelly. So she asks, if we should give so generously, how do we protect ourselves? Should we give all our money to scam callers and pray for them?
Yeah.
Is there a...
Yeah, no, I don't think you serve a scam caller by giving them money, Kel. And I'm not sure that's the point of what Jesus is saying, although I think he's being perhaps a bit hyperbolic here in terms of his application, isn't he? It feels like way over the top. But you should seek to love people. And so that's like saying, if I love people, what I won't do is give them an opportunity to do a bad thing, a terrible thing. And so I will be careful about how I act around people so that I don't actually encourage them to do something evil and wrong, something harmful to themselves.
It comes back to your definition of love, the self-sacrificing, but for the good of another.
For the good of the other, yeah. And so I think that's the thing here. So I don't think it's saying every scammer who demands or asks for money from you should give them to them. It's saying act in love to the other person. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we only have time for one more question.
Yep.
And that's from Monique. So she says, sometimes it isn't safe for you to continue
Yep.
to have certain people in your life.
Yep.
I can't read the rest of this question, sorry. The only way for you to love them is from a distance. What are your thoughts on that? Can we love people from a distance?
Yes.
How do we do that? What does that look like?
Yes, I think I think there's a lot of circumstances that where this is the case, where relationships have become so horrifically out of whack. People have behaved so terribly and affected us so much that the best way to love them is from a distance. So I completely agree with the comment. I feel like I'm taking it as a comment, but I agree. I think that at times it's actually better for people to care for them at a distance than to put yourself back in that situation. Yep. Okay. And it may be that forgiveness is something that just takes a lot of time. I think that's true as well. The ethic that Jesus is putting out here is hard, and it's these kind of realities that show us exactly how difficult it is. Yeah.
Great.
I feel like many times it's something that we aim for and we don't always achieve perfectly.
Well, I think there's still a lot more questions in here, but unfortunately I think that's all we have time for tonight.
Yeah.
So I think we'll cut the mailbag here, and
Yep.
hopefully we can try and get to the other
extra questions. Now we do realise that there are questions piling up from the first few weeks of the show, and we're hoping to perhaps maybe do a special show in the coming weeks and get to a whole lot of those questions at once. And so we'll see what we can do. So just stay tune in for that. Look out for that.
Stick with us.
Hopefully be coming soon. But thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's once again been a really interesting week. I find that Jesus is just fascinating, and the things he says are so outlandish that there's just so much to talk about. But keep the questions and comments coming in. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday night, 7 o'clock.